Rain has a way of washing secrets back to the surface. That night, the storm didn't just bring thunder, it brought her. A wounded German shepherd with scars too perfect, eyes too knowing, and a past that refused to stay buried. Dr. Mason Reed had seen his share of strange rescues, but this one felt different. The dog's collar read Unit 47, but the files didn't exist, not anymore. And when she opened her eyes, he felt something deeper than instinct. In her gaze was memory. In her silence, warning. What Mason didn't know then was that she wasn't just a dog. She was the last survivor of an experiment that had tried to rewrite nature itself. And tonight, she had come home to finish what it started. They would call her a monster. He would call her family. The desert storm rolled across northern Arizona like a living thing, wild, merciless, and deafening. Wind clawed at the sand and thunder cracked open the horizon in white fire. Rain swept across the empty highway, drenching the ground in thick rivers of mud. Through that chaos, a lone set of headlights carved their way forward, flickering through sheets of rain, barely holding to the narrow road. Inside the battered pickup, Jack Nolan gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands. His knuckles were white, his breath uneven. The wipers screeched uselessly, unable to keep up with the storm. In the dim red glow of the dashboard, the reflection of his own haunted eyes met him. Eyes that had seen too much war, too much death, and far too many loyal partners lost. Behind him, in the truck bed beneath a tattered tarp, lay the reason he hadn't stopped driving for hours. A German shepherd, drenched to the bone, shivering, blood-matted fur clinging to her ribs. Her breaths were shallow, broken, and every so often a faint whimper escaped her throat, like a fading echo of duty. Her collar, though rusted and scarred, bore the inscription, Police K9 Unit 47, Hera. Jack whispered her name as lightning tore the sky. "Hold on, girl. Just a little longer." He pushed the gas harder. The truck fishtailed before straightening again. His eyes flicked to the distance. Through the storm, a faint glow shimmered. Haven Paws Animal Rescue, a modest shelter on the outskirts of town. The neon sign blinked weakly through the downpour. Jack slammed the brakes in the gravel driveway, sending water spraying over the windows. He jumped out before the engine even stopped running, his coat whipping in the wind as he ran to the truck bed. "Help! Somebody!" he shouted into the storm. His voice cracked, part desperation, part prayer. Inside, the shelter lights flickered. A young woman in scrubs, Emily Tran, barely 30, eyes bright but tired from a double shift, heard the shouting and rushed to the door. The moment she saw the truck and the shape under the tarp, her instincts kicked in. "Dr. Reed! Emergency!" she yelled over her shoulder. The door swung open again as Dr. Mason Reed appeared, mid-40s, tall, face carved by fatigue and quiet sorrow. His white coat flapped in the wind as he helped Jack lift the dog. "Bring her inside," Mason said, his voice firm but steady. "Quickly." Together, they carried Hera through the narrow hallway, water dripping from their boots. The storm's roar faded behind the closing door, replaced by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of antiseptic. They laid her gently on a metal exam table. Emily moved fast, grabbing towels, wrapping her in blankets, adjusting the oxygen mask. "Her pulse is weak," she murmured. "Severe dehydration, hypothermia, possible internal bleeding." Jack stood frozen for a moment, chest heaving, until Mason's voice cut through. "Sir, I need you to step back. We'll take it from here." But Jack couldn't move. His gaze was fixed on the dog, the way her paw twitched as if searching for something familiar. "She's not just a dog," he rasped. She's Hera, K9 Unit 47. We served together years ago." Mason's hands paused mid-motion. He looked up. "You mean she's supposed to be dead?" Jack interrupted, voice breaking. "They told us she died in the explosion at the training compound. But I found her, miles from there, by the old Cerberus facility. God knows how she survived." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by Hera's shallow breaths and the storm's distant growl. Emily wrapped a blanket tighter around her, whispering soft reassurances, as Mason attached IV lines with practiced calm. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the room, a fragile sound of defiance against the storm outside. Minutes stretched like hours. Rain beat against the windows, thunder rolling endlessly. Mason checked her vitals again, frowning at the scars crisscrossing her abdomen. Perfectly symmetrical. Too precise. Surgical. "What happened to you?" he muttered under his breath. Jack leaned closer, his voice trembling. "She used to be fearless. Took down armed suspects, saved officers, saved me more than once. But when Cerberus shut down their K9 program after that explosion, they said the dogs were gone. All of them." Emily met Mason's eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, a mix of curiosity and unease. Finally, after what felt like forever, Hera stirred. A faint movement, a breath drawn deeper than the last. Her ears twitched. Then slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. Amber. Deep, intelligent, wounded eyes. They locked onto Mason's face. And in that instant, everything stilled. The rain, the clock, even the air. The connection was raw, ancient, wordless. He felt it deep in his chest, a recognition, a plea, and a sorrow he couldn't explain. Emily exhaled in relief. "She's responding." Jack sank to his knees beside the table, tears mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. His voice cracked like the thunder outside. "You were one of the best. They said you died in that explosion." Hera blinked slowly, her gaze finding him. For a moment her paw lifted weak, trembling, and rested against his wrist. It was enough. That single touch said everything. "I remember. I forgive. I'm still here." Emily turned away, biting her lip to hide the tremor in her voice. Mason stood silent, his hand on Hera's head, feeling the faint warmth of life beneath his palm. The storm outside raged harder, lightning reflecting off the glass and into the sterile room like ghosts of the past trying to break through. Hera's breathing steadied slightly, the rhythm aligning with the rain. But behind her exhaustion, something haunted lingered, something far from ordinary. Mason saw it in her eyes, a memory too complex, too human. He didn't know it yet, but he had just looked into the face of a miracle born from tragedy. He reached for the monitor, adjusting her IV drip. "She'll live through the night," he murmured softly. "But whatever she's been through, it's not over." Outside, thunder rolled again, louder, closer, echoing through the valley like a warning. And for the first time, as Hera's amber eyes slowly closed, Mason Reed felt the storm wasn't just in the sky. It had just walked through his door. The storm finally began to fade sometime after midnight, leaving the Arizona air heavy and electric. A low hum filled the empty corridors of Haven Paw's Animal Rescue, The kind of silence that made every sound feel amplified. The ticking of the wall clock, the faint drip of rain from the eaves, the soft rustle of blankets from the recovery ward. Hera lay on her side in the observation room, wrapped in clean linens. Her breathing had steadied since the evening, but her body remained rigid, coiled like a spring ready to snap. Every few seconds her ears twitched, reacting to noises no human could hear. The heart monitor beside her pulsed with quiet precision, beep, 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 steady but cold. Emily Tran sat at the foot of the table, exhaustion clouding her young face. Her clipboard was filled with notes. Heart rate normal, temperature improving, hydration stabilized. But beside behavioral condition, she had circled one word 3 times: tense. She hasn't touched her food, Emily murmured, glancing at the untouched bowl of broth near Hera's bed. Not even water. Dr. Mason Reed stood by the window, arms folded, eyes fixed on the flickering security monitor. The black and white feed showed the main hallway, empty except for shadows shifting as the lights dimmed to night mode. He switched to the observation camera inside Hera's enclosure, zooming in. There she was, eyes wide open, head slightly raised. She wasn't resting. She was watching, her gaze locked on the door, like she was expecting something to come through. She's been like that for hours, Emily said softly. She won't even close her eyes. It's like she's guarding something. Mason frowned, rubbing his jaw. She's been through trauma. Maybe it's instinct. But even as he said it, doubt clouded his voice. He leaned closer to the glass. The pattern of Hera's breathing wasn't normal. It wasn't random either. It rose and fell in perfect rhythm, almost mechanical. Lightning flashed outside, momentarily painting the room in blue-white light. For a split second, the scar across Hera's abdomen glinted like fine metal beneath the skin. Mason's brow furrowed. Emily, did you see that? Emily turned. See what? He pointed to the faint, precise marks across Hera's belly. 6 of them, evenly spaced, symmetrical, too clean to be accidental. Those aren't injuries. They're surgical. Emily blinked. You mean like someone operated on her? Not just someone, Mason murmured, his voice low, almost to himself. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He stepped closer, adjusting the lamp to inspect the scars. Hera's ears twitched instantly. Her muscles tightened beneath the blanket, eyes narrowing. She doesn't like it when you get close, Emily warned, stepping beside him. It's okay, girl, Mason whispered. You're safe here. But Hera's growl rumbled through the air, low, vibrating, primal. A warning. She shifted slightly, curling her body protectively around her midsection. Her eyes didn't waver, didn't blink. They locked on Mason with a strange, unsettling awareness. See that? He said quietly. That's not fear. That's calculation. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she wrote something down. What could make a dog act like that? She's not aggressive, just alert, too alert. Mason didn't answer. Instead, he took a small step back, letting her settle. Hera relaxed slightly, though her gaze remained unbroken. The monitor beeped steadily. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Then, out of nowhere, it came. A faint clicking sound. Both of them froze. It was soft, rapid, almost like Morse code. Click, click. Pause. Click, click, click. The sound wasn't coming from the equipment. Mason checked the monitor, the oxygen machine, the IV line. Nothing. Everything functioned normally. Then he heard it again. This time, unmistakably, from inside Hera's enclosure. He turned to Emily, eyes sharp. "Do you hear that?" Emily nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is that?" Mason moved toward the enclosure door, his shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. Hera immediately reacted, lifting her head, teeth baring in a low growl that rolled through the silence like thunder far away. The clicking grew louder, more insistent. The sound wasn't random. It carried a rhythm, organized, deliberate. Mason stopped inches from her cage, his breath shallow. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "It's me." Hera's hackles rose. Her eyes gleamed under the lamp's light, pupils dilating. She was trembling, but not from fear, from warning, from instinct. Then, another flash of lightning filled the room, so bright it seared through the glass. For one brief, frozen instant, Mason saw her eyes reflect not amber, but a faint metallic blue. He staggered back, heart hammering. "Jesus Christ," Emily gasped. "Her eyes, they changed." Mason's mind raced. That color. He'd seen it once before, years ago, buried in classified research photos he was never supposed to see. Dogs with neural augmentation, experimental optic implants, all under a single code name, Project Cerberus. He swallowed hard, backing away slowly as Hera's breathing deepened, her gaze still fixed on him. Emily clutched the edge of the counter. "Mason, what's happening to her?" He didn't answer right away. The storm outside had started again, faint thunder rolling over the desert. The clicking stopped as suddenly as it began, replaced by Hera's low, steady growl. Mason's pulse thudded in his ears. "That sound," he muttered. "It wasn't random. It was a signal." Emily frowned. "A signal? From what?" He met her eyes, haunted, certain. Not from her. Through her. For a long moment they both stood in silence. Hera's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, her breathing steady, protective. Finally, Mason turned to Emily, his voice a whisper swallowed by the thunder outside. "If I'm right," he said, each word trembling, "she's not just a rescue. She's an experiment that survived." The lightning flared again, flooding the room in ghostly light. In the reflection of the window, Hera's glowing eyes stared back at them, unblinking, ancient, and full of secrets no one should ever have brought back from the dead. Outside, the wind howled once more. Inside, the storm had only just begun. The storm returned the next night, as if it had been waiting, a roaring, merciless echo of the night Hera was found. Lightning spidered across the black sky, its flashes spilling ghostly light through the narrow windows of Haven Paws. The air inside the clinic was heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and fear. Hera lay restless in her enclosure, her breathing sharp and uneven. Her muscles twitched under her damp fur, her claws scraping faintly against the metal tray beneath her. Emily Tran, weary from 2 sleepless nights, checked the monitors for the 10th time. Heart rate spiking, temperature climbing fast. Something was happening. "Dr. Reed!" she called. Within seconds, Mason Reed appeared in the doorway, his white coat half-buttoned, eyes alert despite the exhaustion lining his face. He didn't need to ask. One look at Hera, and he knew. "She's in labor," Emily said, voice shaking. "But it's too soon." Thunder cracked outside as Mason knelt beside the trembling German shepherd. Hera's eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting every flash of lightning like molten gold. Her body convulsed, her back legs kicking against the towel. "Easy, girl," Mason whispered, gently pressing his palm against her side. "You're safe here. You've done enough fighting." But Hera wasn't listening. She bit down hard on the towel, a low groan rumbling deep in her throat, the kind of sound that carried both pain and defiance. Emily reached for the sedative syringe, but Mason shook his head. "No, she won't take it," he said quietly. "She's resisting on purpose." Emily hesitated. But why? It would help her. Mason's voice was distant, troubled. "Because she doesn't trust it. She knows what injections mean." Lightning flashed again, and Hera's body arched. A strangled whimper escaped her, too raw, too human. The sound silenced the room. It wasn't just pain. It was memory, fear, something deeper than instinct. "Come on, girl," Mason urged, steady and calm despite the storm rattling the windows. "You've made it this far. Just breathe with me, in and out." He kept speaking softly, his voice a steady rhythm through the chaos. The monitors beeped in sync with Hera's pulse. Emily moved quickly, preparing towels, warm blankets, and sterile gloves. Then Hera let out a deep, guttural cry, one that rose and fell like thunder itself, and the first newborn slipped free into Mason's waiting hands. For a moment, the world went still. The creature was small, glistening gray under the light. Mason wiped it gently with a towel, clearing its airway. But when it moved, both he and Emily froze. The newborn didn't squirm like a normal pup. Its movements were too controlled, almost deliberate. Its tiny chest rose and fell with uncanny rhythm, synchronized, as if following a programmed pattern. Emily's breath caught. "They're beautiful," she whispered, awe and unease mixing in her voice. "But they don't look like puppies." Mason said nothing. He was staring, not at the newborn's colorless fur or the faint metallic sheen along its spine, but at its eyes. They were closed, yet faint blue light pulsed beneath the lids, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Another contraction hit. Hera's body tensed, and she gave another broken cry. Mason gently laid the first newborn beside her, and within minutes, another appeared. Then another. 3, 4, 5. Each identical. Gray coats, smooth and wet, but without the soft texture of a natural pup. Their bodies shimmered faintly under the overhead lamp, as if reflecting circuitry beneath the skin. The storm outside roared harder, matching the rising tension inside. Emily moved automatically, her mind trying to catch up with what her eyes refused to believe. Hera licked each newborn tenderly, ignoring her exhaustion, curling protectively around them as her breathing slowed. "They're alive," Emily whispered. "God, they're alive." Mason nodded numbly, though his expression had turned grim. Something inside him stirred, a cold, creeping dread. He reached for his surgical tools, gently picking up the first newborn again. Its tiny body was warm, heartbeat steady. But beneath the soft flesh, something was there, something hard, unnatural. He hesitated, then carefully used a sterilized scalpel to part a thin line of fur at the base of its neck. "Doctor, what are you doing?" Emily's voice trembled. I just need to know, he said softly. The blade glinted under the light. Mason's hands were steady, but when the tip of the scalpel touched the newborn's skin, a faint metallic click echoed. He froze. With a gloved finger, he brushed away a trace of fluid. And there it was. A microchip, embedded deep under the skin. Not a normal tracker. This one was engraved. Under the sterile light, the letters glistened unmistakably. Project Cerberus, Police K9. Mason's breath caught. The scalpel slipped from his hand and clattered onto the tray. For a heartbeat, the sound seemed to echo louder than the thunder outside. Emily stepped forward, eyes wide. "What is that?" Mason's lips parted, but no words came. His face had gone pale. Disbelief written in every line. "It's impossible," he whispered. "This program it was destroyed years ago." Emily's hands trembled as she covered her mouth, tears welling. "They made her carry them," she whispered, voice breaking. "They made her carry their experiments." At the sound of her sob, Hera stirred. The great dog lifted her head weakly, eyes glowing faintly under the light. She let out a low growl, not of anger, but of warning. Her gaze moved between Mason and Emily, protective, desperate. Mason took a step back, his throat tight. Hera's body was trembling, but she positioned herself between the humans and the newborns, curling around them as if to shield them from the world. Emily's tears fell freely. "She knows," she whispered. "She knows what they are." Outside, the thunder roared again, shaking the window panes. Rain poured in relentless torrents, beating against the glass like fists from another world. Inside, Mason stood frozen, staring at the glowing microchip, his reflection flickering across its metal surface. This wasn't just a birth. It was a message, a resurrection of something that should have stayed buried. Hera's breathing slowed, her eyes never leaving them. The monitor beeped softly. "Don't take them from me," her look seemed to say. And as another flash of lightning cut through the sky, Mason Reed realized with a chill that this storm was not a coincidence. It was history returning. And Hera, the survivor of Project Cerberus, had just brought its legacy back to life. The rain hadn't stopped since Hera's impossible delivery. It came down in unbroken sheets, drumming against the roof of Haven Paws like the heartbeat of the storm itself. The air smelled of ozone and fear. Inside, the lights flickered occasionally, casting the rooms in alternating shadows and harsh white glare. Dr. Mason Reed sat alone in his office, his face half illuminated by the glow of an old computer screen. Empty coffee cups littered the desk. His hands trembled slightly as they scrolled through pages of encrypted archives, files buried deep in the government's internal network, ones he swore he'd never look at again. On the desk beside him lay a small metal tray. Resting on it, sealed in a sterile pouch, was the microchip he had extracted from Hera's newborn. The engraved words still burned in his mind. Project Cerberus, Police K9. He rubbed his temples, his pulse pounding in his ears. "This can't be real," he muttered to himself. "They shut it all down. They burned everything." But as the search results loaded, the past came crawling back to life. There it was, a file stamped classified, Cerberus Division. The document header flickered in front of him, yellowed from digital age, full of redacted paragraphs and names blacked out. Mason's eyes scanned the text, his chest tightening with every word. Objective: Develop enhanced law enforcement K-9 units with superior cognitive function, adaptive intelligence, and bio-integrated resilience. Experimental results indicate successful synchronization among test subjects through neurosignal communication. Termination order issued following fire at Research Facility B12. All surviving specimens neutralized. Then, in smaller print at the bottom of the page, half burned from data corruption, one final line blinked at him like a ghost returning from the dead. Unit 47. Hera. Status: unconfirmed. Mason leaned back in his chair, his breath catching. Hera, he whispered. The name sounded foreign now, no longer just a dog, but a survivor of something unspeakable. He remembered the rumors. Years ago, during his time as a contracted field medic for military research, he'd heard whispers of a project that went too far, one that tried to merge instinct and intelligence into a single organism, the kind of experiment that blurred the line between loyalty and control, the kind that was supposed to be impossible. Lightning flashed outside, flooding the office with cold light. The storm raged harder, rattling the window panes. Somewhere down the hall, a faint sound broke through the static hum of the rain. A steady pulse. Click. Pause. Click, click. Pause. Mason's head snapped up. He recognized that rhythm. He'd heard it the night before, coming from Hera's enclosure. He stood quickly, shoving the chair aside, and moved toward the observation wing. As he walked, the lights flickered again, the building's old wiring struggling against the downpour. In the main recovery room, Emily Tran sat hunched over the clinic's shortwave radio, her face pale. The small device emitted an eerie, high-pitched sound, rhythmic, deliberate, almost hypnotic. "Mason," she called, her voice trembling. "You need to hear this." He approached, frowning. "What is it?" "I thought it was interference at first," she said, twisting the dial. "But listen, it's repeating. Same pattern, every 60 seconds. The sound pulsed again. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 2 long. Mason's blood ran cold. "That's not interference," he whispered. "That's a signal." Emily blinked, confused. "A signal? From what?" "Not what," he said, voice barely audible. "Who?" He turned toward Hera's enclosure, visible through the glass pane. She was awake, alert, head raised. Her gaze wasn't on them. It was on the window, on the night beyond. Her ears twitched in perfect rhythm to the pulses, and then Emily noticed it too. The faint blue flicker beneath the newborn's thin fur. Each one glowed faintly for a heartbeat, then dimmed. The light synchronized with the radio pulses. "Oh my God," Emily breathed. "They're emitting it. The puppies." Mason stepped closer to the glass, his reflection overlapping with Hera's amber eyes. "Cerberus wasn't just about physical enhancement," he said slowly, almost to himself. "They wanted interlinked cognition, pack-based signal coordination." Emily swallowed hard. "Like telepathy?" He nodded grimly. "Or something close to it. Neural frequency communication." He turned to her, his face drawn and pale. "That's how they tracked them during testing. Each subject transmitted a unique biofrequency to the lab database." She stared at him, realization dawning. "You mean they can find her?" he said. At that exact moment, the phone on his desk rang, shrill, sharp, slicing through the static hum of the storm. Emily jumped. Mason froze, staring at it. 3 rings, 4, 5. He finally picked up, his voice tight. "This is Dr. Reed." No answer, only static. He almost hung up, but then, beneath the static, came a faint, rhythmic pattern. Click, click, click. Pause. Click. Mason's heart dropped. He knew that pattern. It wasn't random. It was the same Cerberus tracking ping encoded into their old military surveillance networks, a frequency designed to locate biological signatures of experimental subjects. He slowly lowered the phone, eyes wide, whispering, "They found her." Emily's voice broke the silence. "Who found her, Mason? Who are you talking about?" He turned toward the window. Outside, the storm intensified again, rain pelting the glass like bullets. Then, far down the dirt road beyond the clinic gates, a faint glow appeared. Headlights. 2, then 4, then more. Engines rumbled in the distance, almost drowned by thunder. Emily's breath caught. "Oh no!" Mason didn't think. He sprinted down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the sterile corridor. "Lock the doors!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Now!" He reached the observation room and slammed his palm against the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered back to life, flooding the space with harsh light. Hera was standing. Every muscle in her body was tense, her fur bristling, her gaze locked on the door before Mason even turned toward it. The newborns whimpered softly behind her, huddled together. Mason stopped dead in the doorway. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the sound of approaching engines now unmistakable outside. She knew, somehow, before any human sense could detect it. Hera already knew. Her instincts were screaming louder than the thunder. Her eyes met his one last time, glowing faintly under the storm's flicker. And in that silence between lightning and thunder, Dr. Mason Reed understood. The hunters had come for the hunted. The storm outside roared back to life, and Haven Paws would never be the same again. The storm had barely slowed when the sound of engines tore through the night. Deep, mechanical, deliberate. The kind of sound that didn't belong to rescue trucks or police cruisers, but to something colder, heavier. Dr. Mason Reed stood by the window, the glow of approaching headlights reflecting off his glasses. In the downpour, black SUVs rolled into the muddy lot of Haven Paws, tires slicing through puddles, their engines idling in perfect unison. Doors opened, and men in dark raincoats stepped out, weapons slung, faces hidden under hoods. At their center walked Agent Cole Voss, tall, rigid, with eyes like slate and a voice that cut through the storm. "Dr. Reed?" he called, flashing a badge slick with rain. "Federal Biosecurity Division." Mason's pulse quickened. "What is this?" Voss stepped forward, pulling a waterproof folder from inside his coat. The wind flung rain sideways as he slammed it onto the reception counter. The document bore bold red letters across the top. National Biohazard Seizure Order, Project Cerberus. Emily froze where she stood. Project Cerberus? Mason's stomach dropped. He knew that name. He'd seen it burned into Hera's chip and into his nightmares. "You have no authority here," Mason snapped, voice low, strained. "This is a private facility." Voss didn't blink. Not anymore. As of 22:40 tonight, this location falls under government quarantine. Every subject connected to the Cerberus designation is now federal property. Behind him, 2 agents unlatched metal cases, pulling out tranquilizer rifles stamped with hazard symbols. Their boots left muddy streaks across the white tile floor as they advanced down the hall. "Wait!" Emily stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Those are living beings, not weapons. You can't treat them like—" "They are classified biological assets," Voss interrupted coldly. "Your emotional investment is irrelevant." Lightning flashed through the windows, washing the room in white. Hera's growl cut through the chaos, low, primal, vibrating through the floor. The agents froze. Through the glass of the isolation ward, Hera stood rigid, her body a trembling silhouette against the storm's light. Her fur bristled, her teeth bared, her eyes glinting molten amber as she positioned herself in front of her newborns. The pups whimpered faintly behind her, huddled close. "She senses the threat," Mason murmured. Voss's jaw tightened. "Contain her." "No!" Mason shouted. "You don't understand. She's protecting them. If you go in armed, she'll—" But his warning came too late. One of the agents raised his rifle and fired. The dart whistled through the air, a perfect shot. But Hera moved faster than any animal had a right to. She lunged sideways, the dart splintering against the metal tray beside her. Her bark exploded through the hallway, deafening, fierce, filled with fury and terror. She wasn't attacking. She was warning. In the next instant, chaos erupted. Hera's cage shuddered as she slammed against it, metal screeching. The alarms tripped from the vibrations, shrill sirens merging with thunder outside. Lights flickered, then dimmed, plunging the clinic into strobing darkness. Emily screamed, shielding her ears as the emergency systems kicked in. Red lights pulsed through the hall, painting the scene like a nightmare. "Hold fire!" Mason yelled, ducking behind a counter as equipment crashed to the floor. "You'll kill her!" Voss didn't listen. "Neutralize the animal," he barked. Another dart fired, missing again as Hera darted toward the gate, muscles rippling beneath her rain-soaked fur. She knocked over a tray of surgical tools, the metallic clatter echoing through the storm's roar. Mason saw his chance. He leaped toward the control panel beside the isolation door. His hand slammed against the emergency override switch. A bright red lever marked "Do Not Engage." With a hiss of pressure, the door locks disengaged. "Mason, what are you doing?" Emily cried. He turned toward her, eyes fierce, rainwater dripping from his hair. "Saving her!" The door burst open. Hera hesitated for a split second, eyes locking on Mason's. In that instant, he wasn't a scientist or a stranger. He was the only being in the room who understood what she wanted. "Go, Hera," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "Run." She moved. In one blur of motion, Hera bolted through the doorway, snatching one of her pups gently in her jaws. Her claws scraped across the tile as she sprinted down the corridor, her tail a streak of shadow. "Stop her!" Voss shouted. "Do not let her leave this building!" 3 agents turned their rifles toward the hallway and fired. The darts hissed through the air like venomous insects. One struck the wall, another shattered a glass cabinet, the third hit. Hera's body jerked mid-stride, the dart embedding in her flank. She stumbled but didn't fall, didn't stop. Her growl deepened, a guttural roar of defiance as she pushed forward. Blood streaked her side, blending with the rain that poured in through the cracked back door. Emily's voice cracked into a scream. "No! Stop it! You're hurting her!" But no one listened. The agents advanced, rifles raised. Mason turned and slammed his shoulder into the door control, forcing it open wider. "Go!" he shouted again. "Go!" Hera leapt through the shattered doorway into the storm. Lightning exploded across the sky, her silhouette outlined in silver as rain drenched her fur. The pup in her jaws whimpered softly, clinging to her warmth. Behind her, glass shattered from the pressure change. The clinic lights flickered violently, alarms wailing as agents scrambled through the hall. Voss cursed, slamming his radio to his mouth. "All units, perimeter breach. Target Alpha is mobile. Move out." Mason collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, his face streaked with sweat and rain. Through the chaos, Emily clung to the doorframe, tears streaming down her face as she watched Hera vanish into the storm. For a single moment, a heartbeat suspended in the rain, the entire world seemed to pause. Thunder rolled like a final warning across the desert, and through the open doorway, carried by the wind and rain, came the faintest sound, the echo of Hera's labored breathing, each step heavy, every movement driven by something beyond pain, beyond fear. Instinct. Even as the tranquilizer burned through her veins, she ran, because a mother's fight doesn't end when she's wounded. It ends when her children are safe. Emily pressed her palm to the glass, sobbing softly. "She's bleeding. Mason, she's bleeding." Mason closed his eyes, voice raw. "She's alive," he whispered. "And as long as she's alive, they'll never catch her." Outside, the storm swallowed her trail, the night echoing with sirens, shouts, and one distant fading bark that cut through everything, a cry of defiance that even the thunder couldn't silence. The desert storm swallowed everything. The world reduced to rain, wind, and flashes of white fire tearing through black sky. Hera ran through it all, her paws pounding against the drenched earth. The pup clutched gently in her jaws. Her breath came ragged, her body trembling, but her eyes burned with primal focus. Behind her, the faint glow of headlights cut through the sheets of rain. Engines roared, shouts echoed. Every flash of lightning revealed her silhouette against the chaos. A wounded mother fleeing through a world that wanted to erase her. Her flank bled freely where the tranquilizer dart had struck, the fluid mixing with rain and mud. Still, she didn't falter. Far behind her, Mason Reed and Emily Tran stumbled through the storm, flashlights bouncing wildly. The sound of shouting agents carried across the wind. "She can't get far," Emily gasped, mud splattering up her legs. "She's losing too much blood." Mason's jaw clenched. "You don't know her like I do now. She's fighting for them." Through the trees ahead, faint movement. Hera disappearing deeper into the wilderness, following the smell of water and shelter. Mason recognized the direction instinctively. "She's heading toward the ridge." The ground turned soft beneath their feet, the rain carving streams through the soil. Every step was a struggle. In the distance, red lasers from thermal scanners swept through the trees, methodical, unrelenting. The agents were closing in. Hera could hear them. The crunch of boots, the whine of electronics, the metallic click of safeties disengaging. Her heart raced in time with the storm, but her steps never slowed. The forest was alive with shadows and light, thunder rolling like distant cannon fire. Then, through the rain, she found it. An ancient oak, gnarled and half-toppled, its roots twisted above the earth like reaching arms. Beneath it lay a hollow dark enough to hide what she loved most. She crawled into it, trembling. The pup whimpered softly as she laid it down beside two others, the rest of her litter. Her body shook violently, exhaustion finally catching her. Rain filtered through the branches above, dripping onto her muzzle as she pressed close to her pups. They squirmed faintly, their breaths shallow, their tiny hearts still pulsing against her chest. Hera licked them once, gently, reassuringly. Then she lowered her head, panting hard, every breath rasping against her ribs. Outside, flashlights swept across the forest floor. Voices barked orders through radios. Thermal reading ahead. Check the ravine. Keep your scanners high. She's close. Hera stilled completely. She knew how to hide. She had been trained for it once, long ago, when humans taught her how to obey, how to survive. But now every muscle in her body moved not from training, but instinct. Motherhood had given her something stronger than programming: purpose. Her ears twitched. The sound of boots grew louder, close enough to feel the vibration in the wet earth. She didn't move, didn't breathe. A flashlight beam pierced through the oak's roots, bright, searing, white. It slid slowly across the hollow, stopping just inches from her face. Hera's pupils contracted, her body rigid. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The storm went silent. Time stretched thin as glass. Then, boom! Thunder crashed directly overhead, shaking the trees. The agent flinched, his light jerking away. "Damn storm!" someone shouted. "I lost the signal." "Regroup near the trail," another voice ordered. "She's not here. Move." Their footsteps retreated into the distance. The forest went still again, save for the relentless patter of rain. Hera let out a slow, trembling breath. Her strength was nearly gone. Her eyes flicked toward her pups, the smallest one barely moving, the others weak but alive. A rustle broke the silence, soft, familiar. From the mist, a dim flashlight approached, shaky, hesitant. Mason. He moved slowly, scanning the ground. His clothes were soaked, mud streaked across his face, his breath visible in the cold air. When he saw the hollow beneath the oak, he dropped to his knees. "Hera," he whispered. Her head lifted weakly. Their eyes met. His full of anguish, hers of exhausted defiance. "Easy, girl," he murmured, crawling closer. "It's me. You're safe now." Hera didn't growl. She didn't retreat. She only blinked, her gaze heavy with trust and resignation. Emily caught up moments later, her flashlight trembling in her grip. "Oh my God," she breathed when she saw them. Hera's fur was matted with blood, her breathing shallow. The pups pressed against her belly, seeking warmth she no longer had. Mason knelt beside her, hands shaking as he reached forward. "You did everything you could," he whispered. "You saved them." Hera's eyes glistened in the beam of his light. Slowly, painfully, she moved her paw forward, nudging one tiny pup toward him. The smallest, the weakest. Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She's giving it to you." Mason swallowed hard, voice breaking. "She's trusting us." The wind howled through the trees, the storm's anger softening into sorrow. Hera's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, her breaths becoming more fragile. Mason gently lifted the pup, wrapping it in his jacket. Its tiny body was warm, barely moving, but alive. "I'll protect them," he whispered, more to Hera than to Emily. "I swear it." Hera blinked slowly. Her breathing faltered, then steadied, a faint whine escaping her throat. Half pain, half peace. Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face. In that brief light, Mason saw something beyond exhaustion. The quiet relief of a soul that knew her purpose was fulfilled. Emily knelt beside him, crying softly. "We have to get her out of here. She's bleeding too much." But Hera didn't move. Her body shivered once, then went still, eyes drifting toward the trees as if watching something beyond them. Mason brushed his hand along her fur, feeling the faint pulse beneath his palm. Still there. Barely. He leaned close, whispering, "Hold on, girl. Just hold on a little longer." Somewhere far behind them, engines roared again. The agents were regrouping, spreading through the woods. The brief calm was ending. Emily looked toward the sounds, her voice trembling. "Mason, we have to go." He nodded slowly, eyes locked on Hera. Rain streamed down his face, indistinguishable from tears. He turned back to her one last time. "You brought them into this world," he said softly. "Now I'll make sure they live in it." Her eyes flickered once faintly, lovingly before closing. Thunder rumbled one final time, rolling through the valley like the earth itself was saying goodbye. And beneath the old oak tree, in the shelter of its roots, a mother's fight came to its end, not in defeat, but in love. The rain had thinned into a soft drizzle, the storm's fury spent. Mist rolled low over the riverbank, wrapping the land in silver haze. The rushing current whispered through reeds and rocks, carrying the scent of wet earth and iron. Mason Reed knelt in the mud, his jacket soaked, his hands trembling as he pressed gauze against Hera's wound. Her breathing was ragged, uneven. The tranquilizer had spread through her system, slowing her pulse, making each breath a struggle. Yet her eyes, those deep amber eyes, still glowed faintly beneath the dim light of dawn. Emily crouched beside him, holding the smallest pup close against her chest, wrapped in a scrap of Mason's coat. Its whimpers were soft, barely audible above the water. Steam rose from the river, curling around them like ghosts. "She's fading," Emily whispered, her voice tight, trembling. "I know," Mason said hoarsely. His fingers were slick with blood, his mind racing with futile calculations. Compress the wound. Keep pressure. Keep her breathing. But every motion felt like delaying the inevitable. "Just stay with me, Hera. Stay a little longer." He'd seen countless dogs wounded before, in the field, in the labs, in rescue missions gone wrong. But none of them had looked at him like this. None had made him feel the unbearable weight of being seen. Hera's gaze pierced him with something rawer than pain. Understanding. Forgiveness. A faint crackle broke through the air. The hiss of radios carried on the wind. Mason froze. The agents were close again. Voices barked through static, distorted but getting clearer. Visual confirmation. Tracks near the creek. Sector 5 sweep complete. Emily's eyes widened. "They're coming!" Mason swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the woods across the river. "If they find her, they'll take everything back. The pup, her body, her story." He looked at Hera again. "I won't let that happen." The German shepherd stirred weakly, her paw twitching in the mud. Her chest rose and fell with visible effort, but she didn't flinch when Mason touched her. Instead, she turned her head toward him, slow and deliberate, her eyes soft. It was a wordless exchange. No commands, no fear. Only the quiet recognition between two broken souls who had finally found purpose in the same place. "You were never their creation," Mason whispered, his voice shaking. "You were their miracle." For a moment, she almost looked peaceful. Her ears flicked once, catching the sound of her pup's faint whine. Emily leaned closer, tears streaking her face. She wants to see her baby. Mason nodded. Carefully, Emily placed the pup beside Hera's muzzle. The mother's breathing hitched. She nosed the tiny creature gently, licking its damp fur. The pup pressed closer, curling into her warmth. Mason looked away, blinking hard. He had spent his life believing in data. In what could be measured, cataloged, explained. But here, in this silent communion between mother and child, all of that crumbled. Love, raw, wordless, unconditional, had become more powerful than any science ever could be. The radio static drew closer. A flashlight beam flickered through the trees above. Mason clenched his jaw. We're out of time. Hera's body shuddered. She lifted her head once more, eyes locked on Mason. There was no fear left in her gaze, only clarity. Slowly, she nudged her pup toward him, her trembling muzzle brushing his arm. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Don't. You don't have to." But she was already moving. With effort that seemed to pull the last of her strength, she pushed herself to her feet, staggering toward the forest edge. Her legs quivered, her breathing labored, yet her steps were purposeful, dignified. "Hera!" Emily's voice broke. The mist thickened as she moved away, her silhouette fading into the fog. Every step left a print in the mud, a trail of blood and rain. Then, just before the trees swallowed her, she paused. Her head turned one last time toward Mason, as if to say thank you. Then she vanished into the veil of mist. The world went silent. Mason's breath hitched. He stood there for a moment, motionless, as if frozen in time. Then, "Kupom," a soft thud. Far off, muffled by rain. He didn't need to see it to know. Hera had collapsed. Emily covered her face, sobbing quietly. "She's gone." Mason didn't answer. He moved toward the water's edge, his boots sinking into the soft earth. His hand slipped into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic chip, the one he'd found embedded in her wound. It still bore the same engraving, its letters etched like scars. Project Cerberus, the symbol that had turned life into experiment, motherhood into data. He turned it over once in his palm, watching the rain slide across its surface. The faint reflection of his face stared back. A man who'd spent years building systems of control, now standing powerless before nature's quiet defiance. He closed his fist around the chip. "No more experiments," he whispered. His voice cracked. "No more monsters." He threw it. The chip spun through the air, catching a glint of lightning before vanishing into the river with a soft plunk. Ripples spread outward, then disappeared. For the first time in years, Mason exhaled without guilt. Behind him, Emily crouched in the mud, holding the pup close. Its eyes blinked open, reflecting the faint dawn light. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Mason turned back toward her, his face pale and streaked with rain. "We survive," he said simply. "For her." The radios grew fainter again, their signals distorted by the storm. The agents would find the trail soon enough, but it wouldn't matter. What they were hunting was no longer theirs to claim. A low wind moved through the trees, carrying with it a sound that made Mason's chest tighten. A faint, distant bark, echoing from somewhere deep in the mist. Emily looked up, startled. "Was that—" Mason closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. "She's telling us goodbye." The mist thickened, swallowing the world in gray. The river kept its secrets. And somewhere, in the space between thunder and silence, Hera's spirit lingered, not as an experiment, but as what she'd always been: a mother, a survivor, a miracle. The dawn broke gray and heavy over the riverbank. Mist hung low, blurring the line between earth and sky, between truth and the lie Mason was about to tell. The air smelled of rain and gun oil. The forest, once roaring with thunder, was now hushed, as if holding its breath. The first black SUV rolled up through the mud, its tires crunching wet gravel. Red and blue emergency lights flickered faintly through the fog. Agents in tactical rain gear poured out, weapons drawn, scanning the tree line with mechanical precision. Agent Cole Voss stepped forward, his face hard as the metal badge clipped to his vest. His boots sank into the mud as he approached Dr. Mason Reed, who stood motionless near the water's edge. Behind Mason, the river murmured softly, carrying with it the last evidence of what had really happened. Voss's voice was low, clipped, each word sharpened by authority. "Dr. Reed," he said, "where is the specimen?" Mason turned slowly to face him. His face was pale, streaked with rain and exhaustion, but his eyes were steady. "She didn't make it," he said quietly. Voss's jaw tightened. "And the offspring?" "Gone," Mason replied. He forced the lie through his teeth, steady as stone. "She took them into the river. The current swept them away." The agents spread out, combing the area. Flashlights sliced through the mist, cutting across the mud, the reeds, the water's edge. One agent called out, "Sir, we found prints! Multiple sets!" Voss strode toward the spot, crouching low. In the soft mud were paw prints, some deep and staggered, others faint and small, trailing off toward the fog-drenched forest. They ended abruptly near the riverbank. No blood, no fur, no remains. Only silence. He stood, wiping rain from his brow, and turned back to Mason. "Convenient," he said flatly. "No bodies, no evidence." Mason met his stare. "You saw what she was. Do you really think anything could have survived that?" For a moment, the two men simply stood there, the scientist and the soldier, bound by secrets neither wanted to carry. The wind hissed through the reeds, carrying the faint echo of the past. The gunfire, the alarms, the bark of a mother defending her young. Voss's eyes narrowed, studying Mason's face. The doctor's calm was too practiced, his grief too measured. Suspicion flickered across the agent's expression. "You were part of the Cerberus project once, weren't you?" he said. Mason didn't answer. "I read your record," Voss continued, his voice dropping lower. "Field medic, contract researcher, discharged after the facility fire. You know more about this than you're admitting." Mason exhaled slowly, every muscle in his body tense. "Knowing more doesn't mean wanting this to happen again." Voss stepped closer, close enough that Mason could see the faint scar along his jawline, the mark of a man who had also seen too much. "If I find out you're hiding anything, I'll bury this place myself." He held Mason's gaze for a long, charged moment. Then he turned to his team. "Pull the perimeter," he ordered. "If she's out there, she won't get far." The agents began to withdraw, radios crackling through the mist. Boots splashed through puddles, vehicles revved to life, and the soft hum of engines replaced the chaos that had ruled the night before. Mason stood motionless, watching them fade into the fog one by one. When the last SUV disappeared into the trees, he finally allowed himself to breathe. Emily emerged from behind the fallen log where she'd been hiding, her arms wrapped protectively around the pup. The little creature stirred, letting out a faint whimper. Its fur, damp and silvery gray, glistened faintly in the pale morning light. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Mason shook his head. "It'll never be over," he said, "but they'll think it is." Emily looked down at the small bundle in her arms. The pup blinked up at her with eyes too knowing for its size. The same golden hue that had stared down thunder, fire, and fate itself. "She's still so small," Emily murmured, brushing her thumb gently along its muzzle. "But she made it." Mason's gaze softened. "Because her mother didn't give up," he said quietly. "Not until her last breath." Emily's lips trembled. "We should name her." Mason tilted his head, glancing toward the river where the mist still rippled from the chip he'd thrown away. "What name would she deserve?" Emily wiped a tear with the back of her sleeve. "Hope," she whispered. "Because that's what Hera left us." The word hung in the air like a fragile prayer. Mason nodded slowly, emotion tightening his throat. "Hope," he repeated. "She carries her mother's courage." The pup shifted in Emily's arms, letting out a soft, almost human sigh. Mason smiled faintly, the first real smile in what felt like years. Behind them, the wind picked up, stirring the reeds along the riverbank. The mist swirled in delicate ribbons, and for a fleeting second, Mason could have sworn he saw her, Hera, standing in the fog, proud, silent, watching. He blinked, and she was gone. Rain began to fall again, gentle this time. No thunder, no fury. Just a quiet rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. It fell over the forest, the river, the muddy tracks that led nowhere, washing away the signs of pursuit, softening every scar. Mason looked out over the water, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Goodbye, girl," he said. "You did what no one else could." Emily stood beside him, silent, cradling hope close to her chest. The pup nestled against her heartbeat, eyes half closed. In the distance, the agent's engines faded into nothing. The world was still again, cleansed by rain and loss. Mason turned away from the river, his coat heavy with water, his soul heavier with memory. But as he glanced once more at the small life in Emily's arms, something inside him shifted. A flicker of peace. The storm had ended, and though the world would never know the truth of Project Cerberus, its legacy had survived, not in laboratories or reports, but in the fragile heartbeat of a single pup named Hope. The rain fell softly, almost tenderly, as if the sky itself wept for what had been lost, and for what, against all odds, had been saved. The Arizona sun rose quietly over Haven Paw's animal rescue, spilling gold over the new white fences and the restored kennels. The air smelled of fresh hay and warm cedar, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once stained this ground with fear and rain. It had been a year since the storm, a year since Hera vanished into the mist. The rescue center had been rebuilt, not just in structure but in spirit. Fresh coats of paint covered the walls where bullet holes once marked the night of the invasion. The sound of barking, laughter, and the soft murmur of volunteers filled the halls again. But beneath the calm, something lingered, a quiet reverence for the memory of a creature who had changed everything. At the far end of the property, near the tree line where the wilderness began, Dr. Mason Reed stood with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. His hair had turned grayer, his face more weathered, but his eyes, those eyes that had once seen only logic and procedure, now carried something softer. A small blur of movement caught his attention. Hope bounded toward him from the training field, her coat a silvery hue that shimmered in the light. She was fully grown now, strong, graceful, and impossibly intelligent. Her amber eyes glowed with the same quiet fire as her mother's. "Morning, girl," Mason murmured as she trotted up, tail wagging gently. She sat at his feet without being told, looking up at him with that unnerving awareness he could never explain. He tossed her a ball, and before it even left his hand, she was already moving, as if predicting the throw. She caught it mid-air, landing softly on the dirt. Emily walked up behind him, smiling faintly. "Still amazes me," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No one taught her that." Mason nodded. "Some things can't be taught. They're passed on." Hope returned, dropping the ball at his feet. Then, instead of waiting for another throw, she turned her head toward the forest, ears pricked, her body going still. Mason followed her, gaze. The trees stood silent in the distance, their shadows long and golden under the rising sun. Every so often, Hope would do that, stop mid-play, stare into the woods as if she could hear something the human ear could not. Emily folded her arms. "She does that almost every night now," she said softly. "Stares out there for hours. Sometimes she even howls. It's low, like she's answering something." Mason's eyes softened. "She's listening," he said, "to where she came from." He crouched beside Hope, scratching gently behind her ear. She leaned into his touch but didn't look away from the forest. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it a faint sound, one that Mason almost believed could be a bark. He stood slowly, setting his mug down on a fence post. "I'll be back before lunch," he said to Emily. "You're going again?" He nodded. "Just to check the line." Emily smiled faintly. "You say that like it's routine." He smiled back. "It is." Mason walked along the narrow path leading toward the woods. The trail was familiar, his boots sinking into the soft earth, his steps guided by memory. When he reached the edge of the forest, he knelt down, setting a small container beside the base of an old oak tree, a few strips of dried meat, a folded blanket, and a note sealed in plastic. He didn't expect to see her. He never did. But sometimes, when he came back in the morning, the food would be gone. The blanket moved, and once, only once, he had found paw prints in the mud, deep, heavy, larger than any domestic dog's. He'd traced them with his hand, his chest tight with something between sorrow and pride. "She's still out there," he whispered now, voice barely more than a breath. Back at the rescue, Emily was finishing paperwork in the front office when a young volunteer came running in, holding a small brown envelope. "Dr. Reed?" the boy called. "This was left by the gate." Emily frowned. "When?" "Just now. I thought it was a donation letter, but there's no address, just his name." She took it gently, her heart inexplicably pounding. The envelope was damp from morning dew, the handwriting on the front shaky but deliberate. By the time Mason returned, she was waiting for him at the gate, the envelope in her hands. "This was left for you," she said quietly. He took it, brows furrowed, tearing the seal carefully. Inside was a single photograph, faded and grainy, but unmistakable. Under a starlit ridge surrounded by desert brush and shadows stood Hera. Her coat gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and beside her, three grown pups, tall, powerful, their eyes glimmering like molten amber. Mason's breath caught. He traced the photo with his thumb, his throat tightening. The back of the picture had a line scrawled in uneven handwriting, the ink smudged but legible. "Tell them we were loyal, not monsters." Emily's hand went to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Mason." He didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the photograph, his reflection blending with Hera's shadowed figure. His vision blurred until all he could see was light, memory, and the faint echo of a mother's bark carried on the wind. He whispered, so softly that only the river and the trees could hear, "I already have." For a long moment, no one spoke. The morning breeze moved gently through the field, brushing against Hope's fur as she sat by the fence, staring into the distance. Her ears flicked once, and then she barked, sharp and clear, the sound echoing through the stillness. Mason looked toward her, a faint, weary smile breaking through the tears. The forest seemed to listen. Somewhere far beyond the trees, faintly came a reply. Low, steady, unmistakable. Emily turned toward him, her voice breaking. "Did you hear that?" Mason's eyes glistened. "Yeah," he said softly. "She heard it too." Hope lifted her head higher, tail still, ears pointed to the wind. Her mother's call carried through the air one last time, merging with the rustle of the pines and the distant murmur of the river. Mason folded the photograph carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. The morning sun broke through the clouds, spreading gold across the rebuilt sanctuary. Life had gone on, but the miracle that started it all had never truly left. And as Mason turned back toward the rescue, Hope followed, glancing once more toward the trees. The world was quiet again. But somewhere in that silence, the bond between mother and child still lived, not in laboratories, not in reports, but in the rhythm of the wind and the loyalty that never died. The day was drawing its final breath. The sun hung low over the horizon, a molten ember sinking behind the pines. The air was cool, scented with wet soil and the faint promise of rain. That same eternal rhythm that had once carried thunder and fear, now replaced by quiet peace. Mason Reed stood at the forest's edge, boots half buried in the soft earth, his silhouette long against the dying light. Beside him, Emily Tran stood with her hands tucked into her jacket, her expression soft but pensive. And between them sat Hope, the silvery German shepherd, grown tall and noble, her coat catching the sunset like brushed steel. The world was still for a long moment. Only the rustle of leaves and the distant rush of the river broke the silence. "She always loved this time of day," Mason murmured. His voice was quiet, but it carried something heavy beneath it. The weight of a year's worth of memories. The twilight, the space between light and dark. Emily glanced at him. "You mean Hera?" He nodded. "Yeah, the night she came here. The sky looked just like this. I remember the sound of rain, her eyes staring right through me and thinking." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Thinking I was looking at something the world would never understand." Hope shifted beside them, her ears twitching. Her gaze followed Mason's, focused on the dark line of trees ahead. The sun's last light flickered through the branches, gold melting into shadow. Mason took a slow breath, the air cool against his lungs. "You know, he said softly. I used to think she was created to obey, a product of science, but she wasn't. She was made to protect, to feel, to love. They couldn't program that. It was already there. Emily smiled faintly, eyes glistening, and she passed it on. She reached down, brushing her fingers through Hope's fur. She's so much like her. The way she looks at us, it's almost human. Mason nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the forest. The wind shifted then, carrying with it the distant scent of rain and pine. It was faint at first, but enough to make him freeze. Hope's head lifted sharply, her tail went still, then it came, soft, deep, resonant, a bark, not near, not loud, but unmistakable. It rolled through the trees like a memory-made sound, carried on the wind and fading into the orange horizon. Emily's breath caught. Mason! He didn't move. The sound had frozen him in place, cutting straight through the years, straight through the silence that had lived inside him since that night by the river. Hope rose slowly to her feet, her posture rigid but calm. Her ears pricked forward, her eyes locked on the shadowed tree line. The air around her seemed to hold its breath, and then, without hesitation, she answered. One bark. Clear, strong, proud. It rang through the still air, the sound of life defying distance, the echo of blood recognizing blood. For a fleeting moment, the two sounds overlapped, mother and daughter, across the divide of forest and time, calling to one another in perfect harmony. The forest seemed to breathe. The leaves trembled. The wind carried their voices until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes brimming. She hears her, she whispered. Oh, Mason, she really hears her. Mason's throat tightened. His vision blurred as the tears came, unbidden but welcome. She's free, he murmured, barely able to speak. That's all she ever wanted. The light dimmed around them, the sun slipping behind the ridge. The last rays stretched across the field, gilding the tips of the grass, painting Hope's fur in liquid gold. She stood tall, her breath steady, her gaze still fixed on the forest where the echoes had come from. Mason wiped a tear from his cheek, his voice trembling. Go on, girl, he said softly. Say goodbye. Hope barked once more, quieter this time, a gentle echo instead of a cry. And then she sat, tail curled around her paws, her head tilted toward the horizon as if listening for an answer. None came, only the sigh of the wind through the trees. But Mason didn't need to hear it. He knew. Somewhere beyond the hills, beyond the rivers and storms, Hera was still watching, no longer hunted, no longer a secret. Just free. Emily stepped closer, her arm brushing his. She'd be proud of you, you know, she said softly. Mason shook his head. No, he said, a faint, broken smile crossing his face. I think she'd just be happy I finally learned what she was trying to teach me. Emily looked at him questioningly. He glanced toward Hope, who was now lying in the grass, eyes half closed, the last warmth of sunset washing over her. That some things, Mason said, can't be caged, controlled, or explained. They just are. The rain began then, not in violence but in grace. Soft drops fell from a bruised sky, pattering gently against the leaves, the earth, and the surface of the river beyond. It felt like a benediction, a quiet farewell from the heavens. Emily tilted her face upward, letting the rain kiss her skin. "Even the storm's softer tonight," she said with a shaky laugh. "Like it's weeping." Mason smiled faintly. "Maybe it's saying goodbye, too." The wind picked up one last time, sweeping through the meadow and carrying with it that distant, eternal sound, the echo of a bark fading into silence. Mason turned to go, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. Behind him, Hope lingered at the edge of the woods, her eyes locked on the tree line. She gave one last look, one last flick of her tail, and then followed him. The three of them, man, woman, and dog, walked back toward the shelter as twilight bled into night. And as the camera pulled back, the forest bathed in gold and shadow. The clouds parted just enough to let the last light of the day spill across the land. Far away, beyond the reach of men or machines, a silhouette stood on a rocky ridge, tall, proud, and unbroken. Hera lifted her head toward the sky and let out a single, echoing bark that carried across the valley. Hope stopped mid-step. Her ears flicked back. For a heartbeat, the two voices met once more in the wind. A song of freedom, of love, of survival. Mason turned, his eyes glinting with tears that caught the last trace of sunlight. "She's free," he whispered again, smiling faintly. "That's all she ever wanted." The rain shimmered in gold as the camera lifted toward the clouds, following the beam of sunlight breaking through the storm. And for one final, breathless moment, the world was quiet, except for the memory of a mother's bark echoing in the distance, forever carried on the wind. Some stories stay with us because they remind us of what truly matters: love, loyalty, and the quiet bond that asks for nothing in return. German Shepherds have always shown us that strength can live side by side with tenderness, that courage isn't about control, but about care. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt they somehow understood you, you already know that. Connection. It's not something you train, it's something you share. If you'd like to explore ways to deepen that bond, there's a resource I've found that offers gentle, thoughtful guidance. Nothing commercial, just stories and insights that bring you closer to your dog's heart. You can check it out if you feel called to. It's helped many dog lovers reconnect in quiet, meaningful ways. At the end of the day, love is the language they speak best, and sometimes all they need from us is to listen.